It's really rare that you watch something that's really hyped up and it delivers, but Canada versus the USA was all that and then some. And we get to do it again this coming Thursday. I cannot frickin' wait.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we are coming off the high of this weekend's Four Nations action. It was insanity. Sweden, Finland opening us off on Saturday, and then in the evening, the marquee game of Canada versus the USA. And obviously today, a couple of other games happened, and so we now know for certain that Canada and the USA will be rematching this coming Thursday. But let's chat a little bit about Saturday, right? A game that probably in many respects was one of the most hyped hockey games ever. I can't remember the last time that anyone, and I mean like just average normal people that I work with or am around, were this active talking about NHL caliber hockey. I can't recall. And let alone, my own fan circles and friend circles, it's nuts that it just permeated not only the sports world, but really, the broader conversations at large. I mean, we saw politicians talking about it. We never see them talking about hockey. So I want to dive into that game in just a little bit and some big takeaways from what was a very emotional, energy-charged game and what to expect coming up in the next one. But before we go any further, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. But first, let's chat about Canada versus the USA, right? And, for this one, I almost said Winnipeg because in some ways, Winnipeg actually played a very big role in this opening round between these two teams. The Jets have always been a team that has quite leaned heavily on Connor Hellebuyck, which is fine. Hellebuyck is the best for a reason. He is your number one goalie. He is the best goalie in the league and really the best goalie in the world, right? By extension, there's no other higher level of hockey. And so getting to rep the Team USA colors for him, I'm sure, is an immense honor. But we also knew that for Team Canada, that was going to be the one person that they had to outduel. And they got close. Jordan Binnington, barring two moments, was pretty good. The problem for Binnington is that on those two opportunities that just weren't that great, he let them through. And in this tournament, being good isn't really good enough. You have to be at your very best. And this is where I think the whole Logan Thompson thing has been a real sticking point for Canada. You look at the Canadian roster, there's really not many weaknesses. Top to bottom, they have the best team, but the goaltending has kind of been a weird question mark. And it doesn't seem like Canada's coaching staff really wants to move away from Binnington. Now, I don't know if that's going to hold coming into Thursday's game. I would think that they've just stuck with their guy because I think, swapping goalies in this tournament with so few games to really prep and throwing Adin Hill into not only the biggest game of the tournament, but one of the biggest games of hockey in recent memory, I just can't see them doing that. But, for this game, to my mind, I think Binnington gave Canada enough of a chance. The reason that Canada ended up just barely falling 2-1 was A, Connor Hellebuyck, and B, the USA defense, right? The Americans were very, very frustrating to play against. And I kind of said coming into that game on a preview the other day, I thought that if the U.S. tried to slow down Canada, that's how they would potentially get under Canada's skin and start to pick away at their elite offense. And it kind of was that way. I think the Americans definitely were clogging the neutral zone and trying to defend at an elite level that we just don't see very often, and they were generally pretty successful. But that doesn't mean that they still didn't give Canada a couple of elite looks, and that's why having Connor Hellebuyck is such a game changer. This is one of the better Team USAs that we've seen in a long time. And so for this team to come into this tournament really being one of the two favorites. And I mean, sure, there's only 4 teams, but like USA and Canada are kind of a cut above everyone else, right? And so it was very obvious that if they did meet at any point in this tournament, whether it was just in the round robins or in the finals, it was going to be a game in which you had to be perfect. And Canada just fell a little bit short of that. They were still very good. They created tons of chances, and I think the net was pretty positive. But I also think that the way the U.S. defended also really put Canada under a lot of stress and frustration, and they just could not quite get it. You knew that this game was going to be a slugfest, though, from the start, when not even like 10 seconds in, literally not even 10 seconds, there had already been 3 fights. That is how intense it was. For the U.S., I was actually surprised that they didn't get bit harder by this. Tkachuk's, both of them came off, and Miller was also off, and they exchanged, more depth players for Team Canada, right? There's no McDavid or Crosby or McKinnon in the box. It's your Sam Bennetts and stuff. And so it should have been a pretty unfair trade for Team USA. Didn't end up making the difference. And, the only Canadian goal was just this unbelievable effort from, I think it was a Parayko stretch pass or something, or maybe it was actually Doughty, that found McDavid, and McDavid just did his sort of thing, pulled off the wizardry on the rush. Hellebuyck never had a chance, right? Just one of those moments where no matter what Helly does, it doesn't matter who's in that, they would have conceded that goal. So after that, it was a very back and forth game, but a lot of frustration, I think, for Canada. And it sets up a very interesting second game. In fact, I would actually argue that Canada losing this one makes for a better Thursday. And, with all of the background circumstances around this game and all the tension, all the booing of the anthems and stuff, all of the hatred, this game felt very old-fashioned. We haven't had teams hate each other like this in a long time. Everyone talks about storied rivalries. Everyone says, oh, they don't like the other guys. But a lot of these dudes are teammates as soon as they walk out of this tournament, right? They go back to their NHL squads. They've got to see those dudes. So how much was the bitterness really there? This tournament and Team USA versus Canada, very different story. This feels like the most I've felt, about the tensions and anger between two teams that I've seen in a long time. Almost every moment was a scrum. It was getting to the point where it's actually a little ridiculous. Everyone was pushing and shoving, but I think it made for incredible theater. And most of ESPN's viewership agreed. There were 4.5 million viewers, which is just bonkers. 5.2 million at its absolute peak. The NHL never has that. Never has that. You only get anywhere above the few million mark during like a Stanley Cup final, and that's it. If that, right? Usually you don't even see rating numbers like this ever. So it's clear that this game really meant a lot to the tournament and to the broader public. And because Team USA was the villain and won, I actually think it makes Thursday's rematch in Boston so much more interesting. I do want to talk about what to expect from that game. I think that there's going to be some big changes for both squads. Right now, Team USA has been dealing with ailments. They've benched a couple of guys coming into this game against Sweden that's ongoing right now. And apparently they've had some injuries during this game. And so what we see on Thursday may not be the same Team USA squad that we saw on Saturday. And that could be a problem for the Americans. Good for Team Canada, but we'll chat about that in just a little bit. Before we dive into the particulars of the upcoming rematch on Thursday, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off, or you want to place a bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, be sure to combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. This also applies for the upcoming Four Nations game later this week. The final should be a huge one. If you think Canada is the one to prevail, you should get your cash in right now for a big bet. Or maybe you're an American and you're thinking this is Team USA's destiny to win. Put your $5 down and you could win a huge bonus. I always think it's very safe, convenient, and easy to use, and there's never been a better time because right now new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just wrapping up some thoughts ahead of, the big rematch on Thursday. Obviously, there's some other trade stuff that we want to talk about, but I want to talk about USA versus Canada. We'll have a more official preview later this week, but I wanted to talk about the overall vibe for this upcoming game and why I think that this is such an important thing for the NHL to get right and why they've already gotten it right so far. The first thing that I think has been great about the Four Nations tournament is that it's very short. 2-week tournament, just 3 round-robin games per team, and you are already into a final. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's short and sweet, and it makes every game have very serious stakes because you have the 3-point system. Every result, whether you win in overtime, in a shootout, or you win in regulation, or even lose, everything can shift the balance of the standings so quickly. And Canada was actually a little bit on the bubble coming into the game against Finland. Didn't end up mattering. They took care of business against Finland earlier today, but the fact that at some point they could have potentially been facing elimination if Finland won in regulation is truly impressive, and I think it just shows the upset potential for a tournament like this. Even though USA and Canada are both at the very top of the echelon in terms of the hockey squads and composition, it doesn't always matter in a 3-game sample like this. Anything could have happened, and honestly, Canada at times felt like it was only going to squeak through. Even in today's game against Finland, they were up by a fair few goals, and then it ended 5-3. So Finland very nearly staged an interesting comeback. But the second thing that I think has been really good for this tournament is really the amount of attention it's gotten. It's had so many more eyes than you ever would have thought, and it's not necessarily for good reasons. I will confess that I think the context could be a lot better, but I think in terms of what it's meant for the actual hockey, the players have really bought it. The All-Star game usually is this passionless, boring affair. I don't remember the last time I actually watched an All-Star game. I'd love to know in the comments when you last did. Maybe you're one of those annual viewers. Maybe you're somebody like me who just does not give a rat's butt about it. The ASG for me is a total waste of time. It's a nice little holiday break for the players, but in terms of the fan engagement, it is awful, and I hate it so much in terms of watching it. Not that I want to hate on fun. I'm sure some people really enjoy it, but just for me personally, it just feels like a break that's not really all that interesting. Honestly, I would rather that they just didn't have it at all and just take the week or two off instead of having the All-Star game. Instead, this Four Nations face-off is coming here for the next couple of years. Every 2 years, it'll happen, and I think it is a perfect little replacement, and really should just be the thing going forward. The international jerseys, the crests on these jerseys, and what it means to each of these players is so much more than just the NHL or the teams or the All-Star game. All of that, representing your country, especially for some of the bigger players like Crosby and these guys who have watched many of the greats do it in the biggest tournaments in history. It just means something different, and they treat it with so much more reverence and energy and intensity. This has been an extremely hard-hitting tournament. I'm sure the NHL owners are absolutely losing it watching guys like Theodore go down, but I think for the average fan, or even like a neutral, this literally could not be a more exciting tournament. Now, all of this is leading to an extremely intense upcoming game. And I think for Team USA and Team Canada, you're going to have to be disciplined, right? This Thursday final is going to have basically the eyes of half of the planet on you. I'm being a little facetious, but at least in North America, it definitely feels like that. I think the drama and intensity of what's coming up for this game is going to be second to none. And I would fully expect, TD Garden to be an absolute pot of boiling water that's just ready to explode. I think both of these teams are going to come out. I don't know that they're going to have a fight off the face-off necessarily. I think that they kind of just did that in the first game, and the second game is going to be more about imposing your will and dominating in the play. Now, Team USA potentially could have some injury stuff. Matt Tkachuk was kind of limping for a little bit on the last game against Canada. Didn't really come out to play much, just sat at the end of the bench. And then for, Team USA, they're also kind of dealing with Matthews, who has some sort of upper body thing. He was rested today. It's probably just precautionary, but you never know. Maybe it's a little more niggling than they'd want to let on. But then Trocheck also spent some time down the tunnel. I don't recall if he came back, but any of these injuries are probably not ones that you want to see for a team that really relies on this defensive familiarity and structure heading into a critical juncture against Team Canada. Canada, for their part, I don't really expect any changes. The lineups have kind of flipped around a little bit. You had Point with McDavid a little bit, and of course Stone. Um, but they've probably found what I would say is one of their pretty capable of winning sort of lines. I think that their combinations are going to be pretty consistent. I don't think that there's going to be anything too crazy. Like you're not going to see McKinnon on the third line or anything. I expect that their top six is going to be the same vaunted elite talent, no matter how they arrange it. On defense, I think is where the biggest question continues to be because Makar, obviously, has kind of been in and out of the lineup. Harley has been in and out, and I just don't know what exactly they are going to do in a game in which I think you really need a lot of puck moving ability. Harley and Makar can both do it. It's going to be, I'm sure, a bit of a toss up as to whether Makar is good to go. I think he'll probably play on Thursday. Kale is just such a difference maker on that team. And without him, it is pretty noticeable on the back end. You're already down Theodore, who is one of your most elite puck moving offensive blue liners. Makar being out again would be a real problem. So something to keep an eye on. But I think Makar is probably going to take a magic cure-all pill and get himself out there because, this being the most intense game of the tournament, one of the biggest games, I just can't see him missing it. I'm sure every player worth their salt would basically exchange their body parts for a chance to get in on this action. So I'm very curious to know how Canada approaches this because it felt like, again, similarly to like the Sweden game, they sort of fell into the trap that the U.S. set. I think the Americans really baited them and they kind of bought into it early. And sure, the U.S. may have lost more talent for, the foreseeable 5 minutes or so that you had the majors going. But in the end, I just think the U.S. was chiding a little bit, chipping away at Canada's composure and structure, and really forcing them to try and be perfect. And Canada got close in a number of opportunities, but it just wasn't quite there. And I think with both teams putting on a defensive clinic, it's going to be a very tight game again. I think the energy of the first game is still going to be present, but I don't think it's going to be at the same level that it was on Saturday, or at least that's my impression. We do know that the American crowd at Boston, could be a little crazy, so maybe that'll get the boys all fired up, and maybe we'll see more fisticuffs. I do expect at least one or two fights. I just don't know if they're going to do it the way that they did in the last game, where it was kind of like set up at the start to have, three different bouts, but I will say with having a couple of days off before that game, it is kind of interesting that the boys are going to be rested up, at least relatively speaking. For Canada, the question in net, I would love to have seen Hill at some point, but I mean, I also sort of think Hill's not that great, to be honest, so I don't know if it matters between him and Binnington if you really make that swap. But certainly, I wouldn't be doing it now in this upcoming game with Hill basically not having had any minutes. I just would not make that adjustment. So, Canada's going to have to live or die by this goaltending duo. And I don't really understand why Logan Thompson, really couldn't have just been the pick, right? Thompson is, clearly in the Vezina conversation. I know some of the coaches that, are on the staff don't get along with him, but I find it ridiculous that you can't put it aside for at least a couple of games and to kind of make this happen, right? For me, it's just baffling, right? But, it's an HR thing. I get it. It's a locker room problem. So, whatever, but I just find it very funny that Canada has kind of hurt itself because of the relationships between some players and some of the coaches, right? It shouldn't be that for an international tournament, but, it is what it is. Binnington, at least for his part, has been okay on a number of really dangerous opportunities. It's just the weak stuff that he faces that he seemingly really struggles with. So I'm not sure if we're going to see that again. Maybe we will. But I think that this game has another close margin. I do think we're going to see like a 4-2 kind of game, maybe an empty net goal or so, kind of being the difference. But I don't know. Something feels like it's going to shift. And I don't actually think USA is going to win. I think Canada is going to come back with a vengeance and be really pissed off and looking to make a statement. A Canadian win, I'm sure, would cause the whole place to erupt, probably in angst for the most part. But, the Canadian fans, I'm sure, are going to pack the stand. So it's going to be a crazy game, but I'm looking forward to it. The ticket prices for this game are absolutely astronomical. They cost as much as like Stanley Cup Finals tickets. So, yeah, if you are in the building for that game, be sure to let us know how it is. I'd be surprised if any of you listening are, but if you have been to any of these games already or are going to the one upcoming on Thursday, drop your thoughts or your experiences so far. Let us know how the crowd energy has been. Are you excited? Are you nervous? For me, I'm just looking forward to it either way. I don't really care who wins. It's going to be fun. I think it's going to be a great game, and I'm just entertained regardless of the outcome. But I did mention earlier that in between all of this, the trade deadline stuff continues to be a sort of background task to all of this. Teams are doing some conversations with each other. And one thought that I had, and a little bit of a weird one, I was thinking about what would happen if a couple of teams, like, say, Carolina and Winnipeg, couldn't come to terms with their upcoming free agents. What does that mean when you maybe have to make a swap with another squad for your disgruntled non committal players? I want to chat about a thought I had about a Rantanen for Ehlers swap in just a little bit. But before we go too much further, did want to shout out our friends and partners at SelectQuote. In sports, having a winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Olympics. The same goes for life. Having strategy like life insurance from SelectQuote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. SelectQuote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, SelectQuote has helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets SelectQuote apart is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offer one-size-fits-all policies, SelectQuote helps you find coverage that's tailored to fit your needs. And if you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage of up to $5 million. No medical exam required. It's more affordable than you'd think, too. You can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. Go to selectquote.com/lockedonnhl right now to get started. That's selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. SelectQuote. They shop, you save. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's final thoughts. Obviously, we haven't really seen a lot of trade movement right now. Teams are continuing to make conversation and have those discussions, but we're not actually, or at least, for the time being, we're not too close to anything officially being announced. I think the closest thing that might be about to come out, though, is Alex Tuch to the Kings. Apparently, Tuch has been a hot commodity on the market with respect to what LA is looking for, and it sounds like the conversations have really started picking up. I kind of would have liked Tuch with Winnipeg. I think he kind of has like that Blake Wheelery power forward, two-way play driver sort of motif that I think would have been a nice fit for the Jets. But, by the same token, I've also kind of said that I'm setting my sights pretty high for this upcoming deadline. I think Tuch would have qualified in that territory, but maybe not as like the top end needle mover that you can pull in, at least positionally for the Jets, right? He's a big wing. I think he could have been a really big boost for the top six, but that's not to say that the Jets won't find somebody of his caliber or even better elsewhere. And one of those options that I've kind of thought about, and I just had this thought sort of randomly, but assuming that like Carolina isn't getting a commitment from Rantanen and Winnipeg can't figure out anything with Ehlers, I kind of wonder if there's a natural symmetry there, right? You've got two elite wingers who are some of the top 5v5 creators in the league. Both are fantastic on the power play. Would both squads consider swapping them? Now, with Ehlers, I think he'd actually be willing to extend in Carolina, and the Canes have had interest in Nick before. Rantanen, I feel, is a little bit more questionable. My impression is that Mikko probably wants too much for what the Jets would be able to afford. I could be wrong about that, but I just don't see them spending like $12 million plus on his services, which is quite frankly what the free agent market is going to hold for him. He's going to get a walloper of a payday, and I can't see Winnipeg necessarily being that team. It would be cool if the Jets at some point did break their salary structure, but I think for the most part, it probably works out that they generally haven't. But for this trade, right, the thing that I think would put it kind of off to the side Ehlers is a really critical part of the way Winnipeg constructs its power play. So unless Rantanen can kind of do the same thing, or somebody else does that for the Jets, I feel like Winnipeg views Nick very much as an internal rental, and I kind of have the impression that they're hoping, summer after a big deep playoff run is going to convince Nick to stay. The other side of me worries that all of the usage issues over the years and sort of the repressed earnings potential is going to make it a non-issue for Ehlers. Right, he's just going to walk. So it makes it really imperative that whatever happens in this playoff run, that you put your best foot forward, that you make as deep of a run as you can, because you're really not guaranteed that this core is going to be as it is in the upcoming season. And I think losing Ehlers is going to be a much bigger loss than people realize. Already, he's shown incredible versatility on the power play and really has been one of the key cogs of why it works now, especially the way it does with him rotating and basically being positionless with a lot of his line mates. And so once he's gone, you have some pretty big boots to fill. Rantanen is a really interesting one, though, and I kind of come back to him a little bit just because Mikko probably still feels pretty jaded by what happened with the whole Colorado trade. I don't think he had any expectation that it was coming. None of us knew about it. The public was completely in the dark. It was a shockbuster, not just a blockbuster, but a shockbuster, because it kind of came out of nothing, right? I don't remember anyone really talking about this being a trade option, other than some speculation that Carolina was interested in Rantanen and was maybe making overtures, but I don't know that anyone thought it would actually happen. And the way that it did, with Nietzsche going the other way, pretty crazy. Rantanen, though, I'm sure still feels aggrieved by this whole thing. He was willing to even take undermarket to stay in Colorado. Would he come to Winnipeg and be that jilted Central Division lover? I don't know. I would imagine that a very motivated Rantanen coming to the Jets would be an unholy, unchained terror. I know that his numbers early on with Carolina don't look great, but I promise you, if you start digging into the fancy stats underneath, it's more unlucky than anything. He's driving shot share at a higher level than he did with Colorado. When he's on the ice, his team has 69% of the shot share, which is crazy. It's just not going into the back of the net for him yet, but I think it will as time goes on. So as his shooting percentage starts to normalize, I think you're going to see why I'm very happy that he's out of the Central Division, at least for the time being. If he comes back to the Central, I would pray it's for Winnipeg. But again, would the Jets and Canes be interested in swapping? I don't know. I think that there's something to it. I don't think that there's a lot to it. But I'm looking for creative trades. I'm looking for things that people aren't thinking about, right? Because Chevy has said he wants to be creative. He wants to be aggressive. And a Rantanen for Ehlers trade actually makes a lot of sense for both sides. The only problem is if Rantanen's not interested in extending at a rate the Jets can afford, Ehlers probably will elsewhere. But then, the other side of it is if he doesn't want to sign with the Jets, it doesn't matter. So you've got to figure out what to do with him if he doesn't want to stick around. But, internal rentals are always a thing. Maybe Winnipeg just wants to keep the core together and hope for the best in summer. I don't know. All I know is that the next few weeks, as we get closer and closer and closer to the trade deadline, are going to be bonkers. And I hope that somewhere in all of that madness, the Jets come away with what they need to start winning their cup. Because this year, I swear it feels like the year. I haven't had a feeling like this in a very long time, not since 17-18, but if there was ever a season that could bring those vibes back, it is this one. Let me know if you would do an Ehlers for Rantanen trade. What would you think would have to be part of the package? Or drop your thoughts or comments below, or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow with more tournament coverage and maybe some trade deadline speculation. Hopefully something juicy comes out. But like I said, all the time that we have tonight. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.